Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are talking national political news of the day, and we are going to start with is a Trump indictment pending in New York. We have the head prosecutor Bragg, who previously everybody thought was going to be soft. He actually refused to bring the financial crimes suit at the last minute when he came in, and causing two deputy DAs to quit. Everybody thinking he was going to be kind of soft, but he is now pursuing. Well, we don't know. We don't know exactly. It is before the grand jury, and there's a potential indictment over the weekend. The former President Donald Trump said that he was anticipating an arrest on Tuesday. Everybody was freaking out about that one way or another. Then Tuesday came and went, and it didn't happen. Well, there's still one last witness to be heard in the in the grand jury proceedings where the indictment would actually take place. We don't know what Trump based his claim that he was going to be arrested on Tuesday on. They were talking about protests and whether this would lead to violence. Republicans freak out. They signed, a bunch of Republicans in Congress signed a letter and demanded that the prosecutor bring his paperwork and come and testify in Congress. He says, I'm not going to be intimidated, and no, I'm not coming. So we don't know exactly what's happening. But it does appear that in an indictment pertaining to the hush money paid to Stormy Daniels, who apparently Trump may have paid for sex with her, and it's being seen that his former attorney Cohen, who's the star witness for the prosecution, may actually, well, he actually paid the $130,000, whatever it was, for the hush money. He was never reimbursed. They're calling it then a campaign donation, but also falsification of records. His attorney Costello has testified, saying that he claims that he was told by Cohen that he masterminded the whole thing by himself and Trump had nothing to do with it. So it's kind of a circus right now, and everybody's waiting. The hearing today was postponed until tomorrow. Apparently, there'll be more evidence heard tomorrow. Dave, where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, so there's like multiple layers of this, and I think like the reason that it's front and center, of course, is because there is the option out there that the grand jury will in fact indict, and that could happen. From what I've read, that this particular grand jury meets Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday afternoons. So that's, with that calendar, there's still the potential for this to happen as soon as tomorrow as we record this, but otherwise it's along that schedule. I think the big picture here for the sort of, the water cooler conversation, the kitchen table conversation, as opposed to the in the weeds about the law, which I'm sure we're going to get into that in a minute. But like the big issue that people's kind of, that people talk about that I'm aware of is the DA Alvin Bragg simply upholding everyone is equal under the law, or is he elevating this charge to a felony? Which might be considered a step too far with respect to prosecutorial discretion, which would then, make it so that this is an overt politicization by the DA. I think that's a political question, not a legal question, but I think that's the question that is people are basically putting that, seeing this under that light on average.
But he also blocked the prior one, so it's kind of interesting that he would be taking this point of view. But what would be the political reason for it? I mean, sure, everybody who's a Democrat, most of them want to see Trump pay for his crimes. But what is the political strategy that the Republicans are accusing them of?
Well, I mean, I think that if you take this, if you stipulate that that's what's happening, then you kind of look at this broader set of crimes that there's accusations of that Trump's committed across the country, basically, all around the election. But that, for example, in Georgia, with kind of calling and trying to get votes created that don't exist. So that's an interference. That would be basically a felony interference with a legal proceeding. But I think what people are starting, thoughtful people are saying is, if a crime is too small, we're looking at it and going, well, that crime might be a little bit too small. Why are they charging him with that? He was he's a former president, and we have to have a broad discretion. We have to cast a wide berth. Like, so for example, when Nixon, all those crimes he committed, the country decided that it was better for the country to pardon him and send him on his way. But that's not the world we live in today. We have Trump like re-entering the arena. So it's going to be the opposite. Instead of sort of talking about getting him applying leniency. Instead, it's let's get him for everything that we can. But the problem is, if it's too big of a thing that you're going after him for, like for example in Saudi Arabia, where there was billions of dollars that flowed to the Trump organization family, extended family through Jared Kushner, kind of arguably in exchange quid pro quo for their relationship. I don't know how much evidence there is of that, but that's certainly a claim that's out there. So the thing is, that's something that lots of people do. Lots of political actors are engaged in sort of lobbying and relationships, and we could talk about name your country, and there's probably have a leader that's involved in some degree of that type of engagement. Just look at the Democratic Party. People are saying that about the Biden family, or people are saying that about the Clinton family.
Sure.
So nobody really wants to go down that road where you're you're making politics and politics and business where they intersect, you're making that the crime. So if that's off limits, then the question is, well, what crimes are you going to go for? And I think this is one of the ones where, if people really do want to try to push Trump out of the box and say that he's ineligible to be president again, you got to have something stick. So this is one of those actions where they're, let's get to the nitty gritty. I'll ask you this point. People are saying that the reason that it was escalated to a felony here is because, well, there's a federal crime that Michael Cohen's already been found, guilty of. He's already done jail time. He did it on behalf of the Trump campaign. So the federal crime, and he's testifying and saying, I did this for the Trump campaign. Now Trump's denying that he knew anything about it, that he did it, or there's all sorts of denials. That'll all adjudicate out in court. But the idea is that if you engage in a cover-up crime with the felony falsifying of campaign finance records is really what they're going for. And the legal issue I want to ask you about is, state prosecutors need to rely on a so far untested legal theory that you can have a federal crime cover-up lead to a state crime felony charge. And that's really, people are saying, why would you try this novel legal philosophy unless you had a political agenda?
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing is I have to wonder what the political agenda is, because I think most of us who are kind of aware see DeSantis as a bigger existential threat to both the Democrats' chance of winning and possibly to the country. I mean, what somebody referred to as Trump with a brain, wins and might actually be able to accomplish some of the things that Trump couldn't accomplish. But setting that aside, it is unusual. I mean, they can't do the misdemeanor apparently because the statute of limitations is run. So they've got to bring it up to a felony if they're going to get him. I think Bragg came under a lot of criticism for shutting down the other grand jury presentation that led to the two resignations. And so maybe he's trying to make up for that. But I don't know. I don't know the case. I don't know the case well enough, other than I do know the fact that that we have confirmed that Michael Cohen did pay $130,000 and was stiffed basically, and and it was clearly to benefit the campaign. So if he can tie it to that, but the federal prosecutors, as everybody points out, never charged him for that. Then again, federal prosecutors are, they've got a lot more on their hands. They don't, for instance, even back in the 80s and 90s, they wouldn't charge marijuana cases unless it involved $25,000 or more or something like that. I can't remember what the threshold was. So it might be the prosecutors just didn't want to weigh the political capital with the utility of trying to convict him on something that maybe Michael Cohen did on his own without checking with Trump. I don't know. And that does seem to be the defense that may be presented, is that this was Cohen operating on his own without Trump input. And unless they've got some proof around that, around Costello's testimony, then it could be a difficult case. But if I knew more about the details of the documents and what they are, and we really don't know that yet, that all hasn't been leaked. It's hard for me to evaluate as to whether or not it's a basis. But it's not uncommon for prosecutors, even state, they do have federal law is state law. You can charge it in the state court. To resort to a federal theory to get around a statute of limitations. It's done in civil law and in state law. I mean, in criminal law. So, like I said, I can't get into the thinking of the prosecution. We'll know more if and when there is an indictment. The problem is that it may not even happen tomorrow. Even if they hold a hearing, the grand jury then has to deliberate, and they may not come out with a decision one way or another until next week.
So there's a couple of things that came up in what you said. One is you'd asked me, what would be the motivation for the politicization, and so I kind of want to add a little bit more, weight to that argument. There's an awful large contingent of folks who, whether it's scholars or journalists or just citizens, who think that there's the approach that Trump takes to governance is harmful to the democratic process, and that his position on certain international issues, his alliances, his just general his specific track record, and his general approach to leadership is just something the country would be better off without. And they want to quote, air quotes, push him out of the box. He's been impeached twice, but yet he's got no shame in that. It's he thinks any news is good news, right? So anything that comes up with his name on it, he empowers him, and so I think that given that climate of the national political perspective around the 2024 presidential election, even though what you said about Ron DeSantis is that he's got more potential to be more polarizing and effective and harmful, but it's a different kind of harm. It's policy harm on domestic issues in theory, as this argument would go, as opposed to kind of undermining the new Cold War with Russia that might turn into the new hot war with Russia, for example. So that's one thing I wanted to say, but I'm going to ask you back a question on this other piece. One of the legal analysts that I heard speaking about this was saying that this might all come down to, which is really kind of awkward, but depending on how the DA presents the case, Trump could say, hey, look, you're telling me that this was political, that me spending that my team spending $130,000 on the election for this payout for this person, that there's a mistake here, that I should have that I shouldn't have claimed it as a political expense, that in fact this was a personal expense, that I personally that it's my personal money, so therefore it's outside of the scope of politics. And I think that there's this, and again, I'm not an expert here, but what this legal analyst was saying is then you have Trump, kind of his defense could be, look, everybody knows that I don't really care what my people think about me personally. This was definitely political, so that he could play, and vice versa. You could do it either way. Whichever argument you're trying to make in saying that he committed some crime and how he accounted for this expenditure, he could make the case the other way, and arguably his lawyers will. make the case that, hey, we accounted for this the way we intended to account for this because that's what's up, not what you're saying that this charge that went to Michael Cohen has something to do with President Trump, when in fact, no, we're making the claim that it's not true.
Yeah.
And that's why Costello was there. Costello said something like he called Cohen totally unreliable, and then Cohen said back right afterwards on one of the news channels, "This is typical Donald J. Trump right out of his playbook. Figure out how you're going to muddy the water as best you possibly can, denigrate the person, disparage them," which arguably they're both true. Maybe Cohen is not reliable, and maybe Trump is trying to disparage Cohen, but that doesn't lead us to whether this case has merit or teeth or if it's even political or not. I don't think any of that's resolved. We'll just have to let this take its course.
Yeah, I mean, I am still wondering how Cohen's cell phone got into Czechoslovakia without him. You know, there's a lot of questions around his stuff. But I do want to comment really quickly on that we have another possible indictment coming from Georgia, which is much more serious charges according to reports. Van Jones actually is predicting that that Bragg won't announce the indictment until after Georgia announces. I don't know. I don't know why and then that way his won't seem so bad or whatever. If that's true, that indicates that it's not for political reasons, because he's obviously not wanting to grandstand or anything. So at any rate, we will learn more about this, and we'll talk more about this impact on DeSantis and Trump, because what we didn't get to is that DeSantis is one of the few Republicans who hit him on this issue. The rest were all defending him. So we'll talk about that another time.
They can find $1 billion judgment against you if you commit hate speech. But just to remind everyone watching, there's no such thing as hate speech. Hate speech is speech people hate, usually the people in power. The truth is, all speech, except speech that encourages people to imminent illegal action, like go shoot that guy. Short of that, there's no hate speech. All of it's allowed under the United States Constitution.
All right, the Dominion trial is set to begin next month, but both Dominion and Fox are trying to short-circuit the case. As we discussed before, Dominion filed the summary judgment motion. It's rare for a plaintiff to do that, and it's rare for a plaintiff to be granted a summary judgment. It's one thing if you're a defendant and you didn't choose to be there, but to say that there is absolutely no defense to the case, well, it's kind of fascinating because the arguments were heard yesterday, and the judge was very very unimpressed with Fox's arguments. Now, that does not mean he's going to rule in favor of Dominion on. It does seem to indicate that Fox's summary judgment motion is going to be denied, and I think it's pretty obvious it does. There is definitely evidence of malice in there. Malice under the New York Times versus Sullivan versus New York Times, I forget which it is. That malice is actual knowledge of a falsehood or a reckless disregard for the truth. And it's hard for Fox to argue that there's no rational basis to believe that, regardless of whether or not the evidence, when everything is considered, does show that. That is a huge, heavy burden that plaintiffs have to make in defamation cases that involve media and public figures. But this is moving forward. Dominion is basically saying, look, these emails, these hundreds of emails show they knew it, and they knew it was false. And one thing that's apparent from the Fox News attorney strategies is they're not even going to try to argue that Dominion did manipulate the election. Truth is an absolute defense in a defamation case, and they aren't even bothering. So a lot of But the reason I think that they may not grant Dominion's summary judgment is the judge is also apparently ready to rule that Murdoch has to testify. They're trying to cite health reasons and say, and you've got plenty in the deposition. You don't need him to do live testimony. And I think the judge, by all indications, is ready to say, no, he can testify. The jury has the right to hear him respond to examination and cross-examination, and I don't know that he would have bothered to kind of let that out of the bag if that was the case. But the judge, says that some of Fox's arguments doesn't seem to be intellectually honest. He said that. He says, I've not pre-decided this, but Fox attorneys are not being intellectually honest. And then with talking about Lou Dobbs, who had engaged in legally protected neutral reporting when he signed many of his tweets with MAGA hashtag. And Davis, the judge, said there seems to be a Dobbs problem sometimes. How can you be fair? And he asks Fox, how can you be fair if you are knowingly providing false information? And again, and not allowing for rebuttal. That Fox is trying to say, well, we are just covering the fact that the president was saying that. But when you just have it relentless and allow their people to say these things without rebuttal, no, it's not good enough. You're not just covering that they're saying it. You are deliberately putting false information on the air. It's hard to see how Fox defends this, but Dave, what do you got to say?
There's so many things here, right? But it's, firstly, I know that, again, sort of like I talked about 30,000 feet in the last question, there's a lot of folks who think, why does this matter? But it actually matters a lot. Like I had said last time we covered this topic, law school professor Lawrence Tribe, like one of the most famous law professors that we know their name. Should have
been a Supreme Court justice. He has that much gravitas. Even conservatives respect him.
Exactly that, right? So he said that this probably will be in the constitutional law textbooks of the future as a textbook case of meeting that threshold you described for defamation, because it's so crystal clear to a layperson, let alone to legal scholars themselves, that and I think a lot of that comes out in the comments we hear from Superior Court Judge Eric Davis. So you named one of them, which I think is worth repeating, although I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But when the judge that you're in front of is trying to describe to you that your organization has a Dobbs problem sometimes, it's basically saying, like, this guy gets up there and is like kind of that textbook. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever watched him or listened to him. I used to, a long time ago. I thought he had a little bit more credibility, but it's
he was like among like Wallace and the rest of them and on mainstream TV until he's always probably been right wing or conservative privately, but he used to be more objective in his analysis.
Yeah, not so much anymore,
Nope.
especially when it comes to Dominion. So there's that piece of it. But there's a couple other things that he had said that kind of, it's in the context of, like you said, probably, or like 99% likely, there's going to be no motion of summary judgment dismissing this case without trial. But that's what they were talking about. And so one of the quotes, I'm pretty sure I got these from Washington Post. It says, this is the judge. Was talking about a Sean Hannity show on November 30th, 2020, where Sean Hannity says Democrats and Republicans agree that Dominion voting machines are subpar, that there's something wrong. And some of these other speakers had gone on to say other things about them, like related to Venezuela and socialist plots, etc., and fraud and
Italian satellites.
All that stuff. Exactly. Yeah. I forgot about that part. But so what the judge said was, when Hannity says this, he's referring to Hannity's comment. He said, that sounds like a statement of fact, and we know that's not true. So he's just basically like saying, okay, just so you know, Fox attorneys, like, we already heard the testimony of Rupert Murdoch and Rupert in deposition. Rupert Murdoch already said they all knew that this wasn't true, and that, yeah, if he had it to do over again, he would have pushed a little bit harder to have his news people not be quite so biased in this direction. Sure. So there's already been an admission of guilt in deposition, and the judge is now trying to break the news to Fox's attorneys that he's a critical thinker and not just going to it's not going to be whataboutism like it is on television and in the political arena. And another quote, which I think is really important too, and then I'll pass back to you. Mm-hmm. So some internal documents revealed that during the lawsuit, this is from Washington Post, during the lawsuit that showed that Fox researchers concluded the claims about the Dominion voting machines were meritless. So the judge's quote was, "How can that be neutral?" And he's asking the attorney. That's a quote. That last statement makes it sound like Pirro has no knowledge one way or the other that Dominion had an algorithm that flipped the votes. But their own researchers said that no, they didn't. There's no evidence. They didn't. So it's like you can't say that if you know that it's not true. So he's pointing out at least 3 occasions where he's saying, like, you guys have a pattern of, it's not just you're pointing to Trump or you're pointing to Rudy Giuliani or you're pointing to some of these other attorneys and saying, look, they're getting it wrong. But we have an obligation, because that's what our audience wants to hear, is these people getting it wrong. I heard this metaphor that what Fox's claim is that they're just a sewer pipe. And they're not responsible for delivering the sewage. Right. So I'm curious what your thoughts are these legally compelling, problematic elements of this case?
Had they provided any opportunity for rebuttal, they might have an argument. If they put these people on and then had Dominion's tech people coming on and saying it's impossible what they're doing, and able to do that, they might have an argument. But they refused to do that because, not just according to the emails, but according to other evidence, their ratings were tanking. We've talked about this on a previous show. Their ratings were tanking because they had called Arizona before any other network. They were proud of themselves for calling it. They did it on the eve of an election, and that took a lot of steam out of Trump's strategy. He was angry at them for it, and people stopped watching. I believe Fox allowed a Dominion person on once, and the audience freaked out. They did not want to hear that. They did not want that coming over Fox airwaves. So I just don't, it's not good enough when you're told and you receive cease and desist letters from the attorney saying, either stop airing it or let my client have a rebuttal. Then Dominion Smartmatic, who is another company that's suing them, and OAN and Newsmax, you can't make that argument when you're being selective about a completely homogenous in what you're allowing to do, and you're not asking tough questions. You're not, you got to be able to say you did that you asked them tough questions, but they were fawning questions. They were and even agreeing, and that they've got a problem too, because Sean Hannity, who says he knew it was a lie, is like saying, "Oh yeah, that sounds like Dominion did that." I mean, they've got him on video doing that. So no, it's not good enough. The sewer pipe, you got to have the pipe available to all, or it's very selective.
Yeah, it's got to be gray water too.
Yep. I mean,
black water.
Right. No, they've got a real problem here. As we discussed on one of our previous shows, I don't think Fox will settle, because even if they have to pay $500 million or something like that, they lose their whole brand if they settle, because they've admitted they've lied. But more importantly, they look weak to their audience, who doesn't want is really caught up in the machismo of the politics. You don't apologize, you don't admit anything, and so they're hoping they're going to make up for it. But that's going to be, I mean, it could be as high as 1.5 million. That's what Dominion is asking for. It seems unlikely they'll get that much, but they could get as high as $500 million, and Did I say that? I thought I said billion. All right. Well, I meant billion. 1 billion. Anyways, this is they're just, it is really clear cut. I don't see how they win this, and they're not making any settlement offers. This is just, and they are losing some of their normal people audience, by the way, after all this. So they got a lot to worry about here. They've got themselves into a jam.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you've got now one of the producers, Abby Grossberg. She's filed a suit that's being held by the same judge. That's
saying that she was pressured to testify. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah. So they're sort of the argument is that that she was brought into a room full of Fox lawyers, both in-house and external of counsel, and that they coerced and intimidated her testimony. And that abuse of the power dynamic within the workplace is discrimination. So she's suing under a discrimination suit, filing under that law. And ultimately, I mean, she was under oath in a deposition. She's responsible for the words that come out of her own mouth. So it's not like you're not going to be persuasive across the board, across the spectrum. But it's just one more piece of evidence that they were circling the wagons here in a way that they were going to try to reshape the narrative. They knew it was going against them in a big way. And I want to add this last little piece too. I think we still have some time here. The interview over the weekend with former Vice President Pence.
Oh.
I actually listened to the whole thing. They showed a small clip of it on one of the Sunday shows. I think it was with ABC, the Stephanopoulos show. I forgot the name of the show, but it's at ABC News. But it was like a half-hour interview. So I watched the whole thing, and the questions were targeted and fair and consistent and persistent. And basically, they were like, "Look, you see that you're trying to have it both ways." We're not talking about your administration. We're not talking about the Trump-Pence administration. We're talking about how Donald Trump as a person handled the election defeat and the consequences of how he handled it and how that led the cause and effect. I've talked about this with other people. Cause and effect is a way to start to break through to people. And the questions were set up in such a way that Pence actually said, look, he was wrong. And they're like, well, weren't you, he's like, I was angry. Yeah, my family was at risk. Congress was at risk because of what Trump did. Definitely. He was wrong. And so he was actually, trying at first not to go there, but he got browbeaten a little bit. And so anyway, they're just starting to see people, more and more people. And so the question is now Fox. Fox is in this situation where their audience doesn't want to hear that, right? So you've got 2 or 3 lanes of presidential politics, which we're going to talk a ton about. And the question is, is there space for Pence here? And I think all we know is that he's pulled away. He said he hasn't talked to Trump since they parted ways amicably.
Yeah, although Pence was kind of funny when asked about the criminal proceedings, and he was kind of being evasive, and the reporter says, but do you believe that that nobody is above the law? And Pence, his brain wasn't working right. He said, well, I believe that nobody is above the law, but also nobody is beneath the law. It's like, earth to Pence, what does that mean? It doesn't, it's not a thing. So anyway, it's, there's a lot to say here, but I am going to make a prediction that both summary judgment motions will be denied because, among other reasons, the the appellate courts are more likely to overturn a judge on a summary judgment motion than they are a jury verdict that has seen light of the whole trial. So that's my prediction. We'll see what happens, but the judge was very clear. He said he warned court watchers not to predict his ruling based on the rigor of his questioning. That tells me that he's probably and the other stuff we've discussed, that he's sending it to trial and he wants it to go to trial.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Fed has raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work.
It's not an intended consequence.
But it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs, people who are working right now, making their mortgages. So, Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, how would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. And we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
Okay, final topic. Elizabeth Warren goes to war against the Fed, or specifically Jerome Powell. And in fact, there's some blistering stuff that has come out in the past few hours. I mean, actually it was yesterday, but I hadn't heard about it. But I mean, she's calling Jerome Powell dangerous at this point. They had a rather intense interaction a couple of weeks ago where she was saying, you're deliberately trying to make 2 million people unemployed. That's 2 million families that will suffer. And he responded, well, that is preferable than the whole country suffering under inflation. And again, the questions, he said, you've been jacking up interest rates for a year. It doesn't appear to have had much effect. But now there's a question as whether or not the interest rates, and it got raised another 0.25 percentage points in this latest meeting, to up to 5 points now, the prime rate, these interest rates might be a factor in these latest bank failures. And if they continue to jack these things up, are they going to cause more bank failures and therefore collapse of the financial market, which she's has been somewhat polite, but she is not a fan, Elizabeth Warren. And a lot of people say, oh, it would have been good if she could be vice president. I'm not one of those people. I'm somebody who is like a real fan of Elizabeth Warren, but I think she's much better on the finance committee of the Senate. She's got much more power. She terrifies executives, banking executives, and people like Powell who are, and Yellen, who are, up there, who are brought to testify, and she is not letting up. I think they did this a quarter of rate, hoping that no more banks will go under until the next time they meet. But we'll see about that. And Elizabeth Warren is taking notes.
Yeah, this is a really, I guess it's that way with a lot of the topics that we cover, but there's so many different angles here. I'm going to start from the angle of, the topic is Elizabeth Warren goes to war on the Fed, but in particular, Powell, Chairman, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. So a lot of this, firstly, she said, I think as recently as today, I'm not sure if like you said, it was today or yesterday. She said that, Wednesday, the interest rate hike was today. The days blur, sorry.
Right.
But she said he's a dangerous man to serve in the role, that he's doing a terrible job. And so she was like actually personally attacking him. But I think she's got a long track record going back to the financial crisis of having a working knowledge of some of the contradictions in the system. So, for example, the Fed has a dual mandate, which is, perfect employment. 5% they consider perfect. If 1 out of 20 people aren't working, that's considered really good, because that way there's some motion in there. Some people are a little hungrier, and so there's so anyway, that's their goal. Their other goal is 2% inflation. Which obviously we're not there, because you need some inflation for steady growth. But if it's too much, you can't afford things, and there's all the problems we're having today. So the Fed's got this dual mandate. But on top of that, they are also regulators of the banking system. And they've got this new category since 2008, and we realized just how fragile the entirety of the system is. These globally, systemically important banks, it's about 30 banks that make this cut. And one of those banks effectively has been failing on life support for a really long time. And, the regulators have just not really done much about it. So if you look at like the one thing that could destroy the entire global economy, which is if these big banks lose trust in each other, like global derivatives. It's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother show, but it's an immense amount of money. And if as soon as the banks don't trust each other, trillions of dollars are at stake. That seems abstract, but what's a lot more concrete is like how SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, went down, which was the regulatory structure that would have been able to kind of force them to be a little bit more self-reflective about their strategy for hedging inflation increases. The guy who was the president of that bank, he's a member of the San Francisco board. Not anymore, not since they collapsed. But you've basically got the foxes watching the hen house. That's the easiest way to understand what self-regulation looks like in the land of the Fed. And so the fact, going back to Elizabeth Warren, she knows her stuff. She's, this is her expertise.
She is.
And so the question is, a long time ago, I was having a conversation with somebody and I said, I don't think very many of the people in Congress really understand this stuff. So they just turn right to the experts who own all the money and all the system. They control it, they regulate it, they use the revolving door to get positions of power and influence, whether it's, Wall Street, K Street, however they choose to, and nobody is against people earning a living. Nobody is against capitalism. No one's against people making money. I don't say nobody, most people. But you want smart regulation.
That's right.
Elizabeth Warren tries every once in a while to say like, hey, Houston, we have a problem. And the whole system's like, these aren't the droids you're looking for. There's no problem here. Just, the Wizard of Oz, the all this, don't
pay
look at
no
the guy
attention
behind the curtain.
to behind the curtain. Yeah.
And so anyway, I think she's serving a useful role.
I mean, she wrote a letter a week ago where she said some pretty blunt things. I'm going to quote, "As chair of the Fed, you have led and vigorously supported efforts to weaken the regulations that would have subjected banks like SVB and Signature to stronger liquidity requirements, more robust stress testing, and routine resolution planning obligations. Make no mistake, your decisions aided and abetted this bank failure, and you bear your share of responsibility for it." And then she also said on Meet the Press on Sunday, she basically said Powell took a flamethrower to the regulations. And as a consequence, the CEOs of the banks did exactly what we expected. They loaded up on the risk that boosted their short-term profits. They gave themselves huge bonuses, a reference to back after they took government relief money and salaries, and exploded their banks. I mean, it is, and I'm taking this from actually a really great article by John Nichols in The Nation magazine. Elizabeth Warren, it's entitled, "Elizabeth Warren is Right, Jerome Powell Should Be Held to Account." And it's not often that Nation magazine, gets behind a quote unquote mainstream Democrat, but they are really happy with her. Will it make a difference? Well, the point is that we wouldn't even be hearing about this if she wasn't in that office. Even Bernie Sanders, who's shares similar politics with her. Well, first of all, he's not on the finance committee, and so not in the position, doesn't have the bullhorn. But second of all, she is just an expert on this. When she says these things, you need to take it seriously.
Yeah. And people said similar good things about Katie Porter's knowledge of the system. Right. Because I think she was actually a student of Elizabeth Warren at one point. But Katie is known, Congress member Porter is known, like I don't know her on a first name basis. She's known for kind of taking out that whiteboard and having the largest bank in the world, the most systemically risky, dangerous, on the top 30 banks, they have 5 tiers. This is in Switzerland, the Financial Stability Board that kind of runs the global, that runs the regulation recommendations of the global financial system. That's kind of their role, the Basel Accord of Switzerland. But anyway, JP Morgan Chase is at the top. because they're just the big kahuna.
Yes.
And so when that CEO steps into the Congress to testify, and Katie Porter really just shreds him in a way that some would argue goes a little too far for politeness. Even Democrats were considering it impolitic the way she did that. But she got a lot of fans, and her base went up. I think Elizabeth Warren does a better job of being more like the professor. A little bit less like the gotcha kind of angle.
But there is that black tie event. Where she went to Jeff Bezos's home, and the Fed was, pardon me, not her, the Fed, Jerome Powell did, and Porter attacked him on this and said, can you imagine how attending a lavish party at Jeff Bezos' $23 million home, along with Jared and Ivanka and the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, might give off the sense to the public that you are not in fact immune from external pressures? That was Katie Porter. I mean, it's
bringing it to him.
And of course, if she's senator next year, she and Elizabeth Warren will probably be on that finance committee together. People won't even go. They'll resist the subpoenas and everything. It's going to be interesting.
So one other piece of this that I think was worth mentioning is, like you'd said, the interest, and I know we don't have time to get into super technical issue at the end of the show here, but you'd said, when we talked about it a little bit last week, that the really safe long-term treasuries that some of these banks are holding are kind of working against them, because as interest rates go up, the face value, the notational present mark-to-market value goes down and down, so they lose a little bit of their legal solvency element. So what the Fed has done, actually Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has done, is said, if you have money in the bank, even if it's above the amount that's insured, we're not going to let that disappear. And so it's not quite the same thing as saying we're guaranteeing you get all of your money back up to $250,000 in the FDIC guaranteed. But that hasn't changed. The FDIC hasn't really started asking the banks for more money to insure that above that amount. And we're talking real money. Like 2008, we were in a pretty bad spot when things started to unwind. There's an extra, I think it's like $10 trillion of uninsured deposits in the banking system. I don't know if they're all uninsured, but compared 2008 to 2023, it's grown by it's more than doubled the amount of money in the banks. They don't have that. They have $150 billion of insurance, not 17 trillion. So it really is all about confidence. So when the Treasury Secretary says, look, if you've got a bank statement that says you've got money, we're not going to let that go anywhere. So even if they have to make that money up out of thin air, it's not going to be inflationary, supposedly, because really what they're doing is they're not making new money. They're just not letting money disappear. So in a way, there's this again, I hate to use tightrope here, but there's alchemy. There really is alchemy going on to be both solvent and secure. And so they're just going to they've already done so many extraordinary things since 2008. They're going to continue to do anything extraordinary that they need to do. So that, in a way, that's good. The money's going to keep flowing. The system's going to keep flowing. Yeah. But regulators really do need a reality check, and people really need to get informed and inform their Congress members on some of the things that could be done to shore up the credibility and confidence of how they self-regulate.
Obviously, and actually on that, Warren wrote another letter about 4 days ago. She's writing a lot of letters. They're open letters, talking about the probe of the inspectors of the bank's collapse, and he actually wrote it to the inspectors general and the Fed board. It is also critical that your investigation be completely independent and free of influence from the bank executives or regulators that were responsible for action that led to these bank failures. I am particularly concerned that you avoid any interference from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who bears direct responsibility for and has a long record of failure involving regulatory and supervisory matters involving these two banks. She does not want him in there. It's, she believes he is the worst thing. And, is it, there's a lot of questions. Is it even the Fed's responsibility to control inflation? Is that even in the charter of when it was there? It's their job is to have monetarist policies, but to control the prices of things. Okay, I mean, technically speaking, that's the value of the dollar going down, but to unemploy people in order to pull money out of the economy, when there are other ways to pull money out of the economy, but it worked in the 1980s, so. It's now like the hammer, like that's what you have to do. There is no other way to pull money out of the economy. I mean, I support all kinds of measures like reducing the military budget, for instance, which is insanely inflationary and just keeps going up and up and up every year. And we've talked about a couple of other possibilities here, but you don't need to unemploy people to control it, and it's not working. You're not unemploying anybody. We're not in a recession yet. All you're doing is destabilizing the economy and making investors nervous. That's all they're accomplishing at this moment. I mean, when you keep doing the same thing over and over again, that's supposed to be a sign of insanity, right? And they've been doing it every meeting. They've upped it. They've gone down from doing it up. He was actually talking about doing 3/4 rate increase, but I think the bank failures kind of put an end to that notion. This brings us to our predictions. Dave, what do you have?
Prediction for today. I saw an article in Politico. I think it's worth sharing a little bit about. The takeaway here was that it's not just the Russia's war in Ukraine that divides the GOP, but Republicans now are also split on whether to finally cut off approval for the Iraq war 2 decades after it began. So there's this authorization for use of military force that underpins, in effect, a global presence of our military. And so, for example, drones can go kill anybody anywhere if they deemed X, Y, and Z target requirements are met. But in fact, we've got finally a split on major foreign policy issues going on now. And so Senator Josh Hawley, Republican, said, voters are tired of wars that don't have any justification or basis. The Iraq thing, that was not justifiable. And that's hard for my party to admit because they pushed it. They carried water for it. So you're seeing a split. There's about 19 Republican senators who are siding with Democrats who want to end the War Authorization Act. The argument against it, of course, is expressed by Senator Mitch McConnell's surrogate, Senator John Thune, Republicans. And he said, I personally believe they serve an important legal and presidential functions when it comes to the war on terror. There's a diversity of opinion among Republicans. So that's insider talk for we need to replace it. They need something to replace it before they're willing to get rid of it. And that's where we are. We're at that point now where enough people are against it that it's probably going to go away, and that there's probably going to be a discussion on what to replace it. But the takeaway here is that although it's symbolic, it's also significant. This authorization will finally be repealed, ending America's longest war.
All right, I'll be really quick. I mentioned DeSantis going on the attack against Trump. He is slipping in the polls. He's with Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, and also with the general population. I believe it has to do with not just the book banning stories, but also the position he took with regard to Ukraine. And now he's attacking Trump, and it's going to have an initial impact, but he knows that he's got to do that, and his Republican allies are telling him he needs to do that. So I predict that DeSantis is going to declare his presidency by April 15th. I don't think he'll wait till the end of April, and he will then start going on the attack on Trump to try to regain some of the ground that he's lost. But we will be discussing that until next time. Stay informed and stay engaged.